About a month ago, I was telling you guys that there's an issue with Ableton Simpler and Sampler. Video's up on YouTube now. I showed you guys that when you import a hi-hat into Simpler or Sampler, it sounds fine when you're playing out the pattern, but as soon as you transpose up or down, it starts to sound. There's a lot of artifacts and a lot of low-end rumble. Overall, the oversampling algorithm in Simpler and Sampler just doesn't sound good, especially on hi-hats. I showed you guys how to fix that. What you have to do is set the interpolation from normal to best. And then hi-hat rolls sound really clean and clear. This is something that I felt that should have been default in Ableton for a while, and it isn't. So I gave you guys a workaround on how to fix that. What you have to do is, if you have a Simpler open, you have to convert it into a sampler, change the interpolation from normal to best, save that as a default, convert it back to a Simpler, and then save that as a default. Then anytime you load up a Simpler or Sampler, and put a hi-hat into it, it will be the best quality. So I gave you guys that tip, it's on YouTube, and you guys were wilding out, like, how did we not know this? And I didn't know it either. Somebody told me about this in a DM on Instagram. I took his session, I studied it, and I was like, yo, this actually is an issue with the algorithm in Ableton, audio-wise. I basically figured out how to fix it completely. But there was still one thing that bothered me. When you double-click a sound, it goes right to Simpler. That's great. But the problem is when you did that, even if you saved a default patch with the best interpolation, it would still default back to normal. So every time you'd have to load a Simpler and drag in a sound, load a Sampler, drag in the sound. You wouldn't be able to just double click it. And that bummed me out. Workflow, I'm all about workflow. Guess what? Shout out to Daku Beats. Daku Beats said you can actually use the modified Simpler automatically when double clicking samples. In the browser, go to your user library, defaults, dropping samples, on device view. Drag the empty and modified Simpler into that folder and save it as an ADV preset in there. Every time you double click a sample in the browser or drag a sample into the device view, a Simpler will load with the settings you chose for it. You guys got that? If you go to user library, defaults, dropping samples, and on device view, and this is fire that Ableton does this. Shout out to Ableton. You can actually change the device that defaults when you double click a sound. What you want to do is watch the previous video where I talk about what to change, save it as a default preset, and drag that preset into the on-device view folder in your user library. This is how to get to it. Windows, it's users, your username, documents, Ableton user library, and Mac, it's Macintosh HD, users, your username, music, Ableton user library. That's your default location. So then, once you're in user library, you want to go to defaults, dropping samples, on device view. And you want to take the preset that you created with the best interpolation and just drag it in there. Matter of fact, you can drag any device in there you want, and that's going to be your default device for double clicking a sample in Ableton.